Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video we're taking a first look at a brand new Pokemon in the world of Pokemon Go, Polteageist. Now Polteageist evolves from Sinistea, which can be encountered via Tier 1 raids. Polteageist is going to be a pure Ghost-type Pokemon, and for the fast move it has Astonish, so it's off to a terrific start. But the charge moves, Dark Pulse and Shadow Ball do leave quite a bit to be desired in terms of pacing. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and take a look at the newest Pokemon in Pokemon Go, Polteageist, in the Open Ultra League. Hopping into the first match, picking up a bad lead Cobalion into Florges. I'm going to save switch into Shadow for Alligator. Opponent tries to make a Hydro Cannon catch onto Goodra, but they've given for Alligator a near insurmountable energy advantage. Ice Beam crashes into Goodra, Goodra forced to give up an early shield, and up this much energy, I am very okay to commit a shield back. I'm going to overfarm as much as possible and really make my opponent second guess this shielding decision. If I bait, I'm only one away from the nuke. They call the bait, down goes Goodra, and I win switch advantage. In comes Florges, firing off the Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon is shielded, and it's a CMP tie. Oh, that's actually great for me. They're going to be able to pick up the KO with Disarming Voice, but now I can bring in Polteageist. Polteageist, it is very attack weighted, so this thing is going to output damage, but in exchange, it is super frail. Opponent is going to switch out their final Pokemon revealed as Skeledirge, and Skeledirge is going to get very easily KO'd here with the Dark Pulse. So down goes Skeledirge, opponent going to bring back in the Florges, but I get to the Shadow Ball, and this will easily do enough to secure victory here as Shadow Ball KOs Florges, and that's a Game 1 win. We move to the next match, picking up an okay lead Cobalion versus Feraligatr. Gonna go for the Sacred Sword, and they make a devastating catch. That's what I get for, honestly, just playing on autopilot. I was not watching for a potential catch, and my opponent catches a double resisted move. That is an absolutely terrible way to start off a battle. I'm now going to send in Feraligatr. Feraligatr, more than happy to absorb energy from that Giratina. I did want to rebank energy on the Cobalion before I swapped, though, as Cobalion energy is often very valuable. I'm going to unleash the Ice Beam onto Giratina. Giratina barely hangs on with a sliver of HP, and unfortunately that means if I had cap-tied them, it would have actually KO'd. In the back, they have Guzzlord. I get the last second Hydro Cannon, so a rare instance where I actually get damage registration error and I get that move off. I can bring in Cobalion, and his opponent is just catching left and right. Oh my goodness. Sacred Sword now caught onto Feraligatr. I send in Polteageist, and Polteageist is honestly going to have a terrible time here, but the other option is Polteageist going up against a Guzzlord. Polteageist barely makes the Dark Pulse, but as you can see, this thing has zero bulk to speak of whatsoever. Dark Pulse is shielded. In comes Cobalion, and I'm clicking the Sacred Sword instantly. I want to force the final shield from my opponent, and now I can potentially commit to a farm down. Opponent is going to be able to grab those shields back, and then they're going to look to send in the Guzzlord. But Guzzlord's charge moveset is completely walled by Cobalion's unique typing. So the opponent is going to send in the Guzzlord, and this is going to be a very tough game. Brutal Swing is going to connect. I'm farming up to the back-to-back Sacred Swords, and I'm throwing here. This should be enough to knock out the Guzzlord, and then I have a move for Feraligatr, but Disaster strikes. They live on 1 HP, and again, for a second time in this battle, if I just CMP tied them, they would get KO'd, but instead I end up losing the most winnable game ever, just due to a flurry of misplays. We move to the next match, needing some serious redemption, leading the Cobalion into Tentacruel. This is honestly an awkward matchup for both parties. Ideally, I want to chip a Stone Edge, then tank a Scald, and then look to safe switch into the Shadow Feraligatr, because for a lot of teams, if they're using Tentacruel, Tentacruel is their Feraligatr counter, but now that they're into the yellow health, suddenly Feraligatr can Shadow Claw into Hydro range, and things get very uncomfortable very quickly. Opponent tries for a catch onto Guzzlord. I do not let that happen, and now I'm going to go for a bait. The Hydro Cannon bait is no shielded by my opponent, but I do need 2 moves to KO here anyway, so that's not disastrous. The Ice Beam is now going to land, and I get the farm down, but I survive on basically no HP. So all I do is just give farm to the Tentacruel. In comes Polteageist. These Astonishes adding up. Opponent does not get their charge move off. They get KO'd. In the back is Moltres, and I'm so happy that I have Cobalion on the lead with this team. This is basically a guaranteed Ancient Power. I thought about calling it, but honestly, even if their defense was lowered to -3 by a Brave Bird, I did not trust Polteageist to get the Astonish farm down. Opponent is going to call a bait, which is kind of what they have to do in this situation, but it's still not going to put them in a winning position. Because now they're in a range where I do actually trust Polteageist to farm them down, so I'm very fine no-shielding a Brave Bird. They end up Ancient Powering, so the game is just instantly over, but even if they did go for the Brave Bird, once the defense is at -3, I would have no issue going for an Astonish farm down. And now I can send in Polteageist. Polteageist firing off the Shadow Ball. This is resisted, but it will be enough to KO. Polteageist, if nothing else, has quite a lot of damage. We move to the next match, Cobalion versus Ampharos. Now, Ampharos can, of course, have access to Focus Blast, and Focus Blast would be a pretty massive problem for Cobalion. I'm firing off the Sacred Sword. That does a solid amount of damage. This is a regular Ampharos, which is a little bit tricky, as a regular Ampharos can actually live 2 Sacred Swords, and they actually undertap. I am going to respect the Focus Blast. They don't have it. It's just a brutal swing. And I feel like an absolute fool. Oh my goodness. Granted, there's no way to know unless you end up seeing what they throw. But man, it feels terrible shielding a brutal swing in that situation. Down goes the Ampharos. Opponent going to send in Dragonite. And I actually have a pretty nice play I can do here. I can farm up and bait with the Sacred Sword. And if I get the shield, I'm 1 off the Stone Edge. And I will outpace them by 1 singular turn, getting to the Stone Edge before they get to the Superpower. The Stone Edge is going to be shielded by my opponent. And this is tough. I'm in a range where, honestly, if they Dragon Claw, I still don't think I get knocked out. They go for a Superpower, and now I can send in Polteageist. Look at the Astonishes go. Opponent firing off a Dragon Claw, but that's very fine by me. I'm just going to look to commit to a farm down here with Polteageist. Polteageist, oh, that frame drop was terrible. I think I was supposed to get another Astonish in there, but I don't. They're able to save the Dragonite, and in the back is Venusaur. And that frame drop may have just cost me. That Shadow Ball does a ton of damage. I bring in the Feraligatr. I can't get the Hydro. They're going to be able to knock me out. And I think I can Astonish down the Venusaur, but I can't farm down the Dragonite unless I leave with a move. But I didn't. So close, yet so far. We get the Dream Lead in the next match, though, Cobalion versus Shadow Drapion. And the Drapion is staying in. I actually overfarmed there out of fear that they would catch. After that earlier match where I had a Sacred Sword caught on a Giratina, I do not want to let any more catches happen. My opponent is going to fire off their energy. It is just going to be the Aqua Tail. That's not going to do much damage whatsoever. They try for a catch on a Drifblim, but again, I'm not going to let that happen. I am locked in. Stone Edge grabs the shield. In comes Shadow Feraligatr, and unless they throw an alignment here, then I actually outpace and get to the Ice Beam, and Ice Beam just KOs. So are they willing to go down 2 shields? No, they just let the Drifblim go. Drifblim loses a massive amount of energy, and now they're going to bring back in the Drapion. Drapion overfarming as much as it can, looking to pick up a knockout with a crunch. I'm going to let this go, and now it's my turn to get 1 HP survives. Look at Shadow Feraligatr. Hydro Cannon is caught onto a Walrein, and now I can send in Polteageist. And Polteageist, now that it has a near insurmountable advantage in terms of having a pretty big shield advantage and my opponent's other Pokemon basically removed from the field of play, now Polteageist is in a position to succeed. I'm going to look to double shield Icicle Spears, get the farm down, and exit with the Dark Pulse loaded. Dark Pulse is resisted, but again, that Drapion, it just doesn't have any more health. The Drapion is so low. Drapion re-enters the battlefield just to get hit with the Dark Pulse. Dark Pulse doesn't even get same type attack bonus, but what it does get is a win. Nightmare lead in the next match, Cobalion versus Annihilate. The save switch to Shadow Feraligatr answered with Licky Licky. And unlike in the Great League, where this is an extremely flippable matchup for the Feraligatr, in the Ultra League versus the normal rollout users, things get uncomfortable very, very quickly. And the reasoning behind that is that in the Great League, 2 Hydro Cannons KO stuff like Licky Licky, Miltank, or Dunsparce. But in the Ultra League, as we see, Licky Licky tanks that very comfortably. They're able to throw on alignment there, and in this particular circumstance, that's actually a brilliant play from my opponent. See, I was counting on them to overfarm, try and throw in good timing, and therefore allow me to force a shield advantage. But instead, by throwing on alignment, they forced my shield before I could force theirs, and now we exit on shield parity. And if I know anything about Polteageist at this point, it desperately wants a shield advantage. In comes Polteageist, in the back is Walrein, and I do have an energy lead, and I get an Astonish through, but it's just not enough of an advantage to take home this win. I am going to be farming up, firing off the Dark Pulse. Dark Pulse is going to do some pretty solid damage here, but the opponent is, of course, going to commit the shield because they know Wall Rain is going to be the key to victory. Wall Rain going to force the final shield, and I'm still going to try and play this out to the bitter end, hoping against hope that a win con emerges, but it's just looking completely doomed. Polteageist picks up the KO. In comes Annihilate. Annihilate can just counter down my Ghost type, so I'm forced to switch out into Cobalion, and at this point, my opponent has a very safe win con of farming up to a Rage Fist plus a close combat. There's a horrifically bad frame drop, but it's not going to impact the outcome of this game. Obviously, it's extremely disheartening to see, but in this particular instance, the game was over regardless as to whether it had a frame drop or not, and Rage Fist definitely going to KO Polteageist. We move to the next match, picking up a great lead Cobalion into the Shadow Skuntank. Most Skuntanks are not on Flamethrower anymore, and in that case, then they're actually completely walled here. Skuntank's niche for a while was the fact that it did a flamethrower, but honestly, as of late, most are on Trailblaze and Crunch. But the fact that they're staying in makes me think there probably is a flamethrower in my Cobalion's future. Nevertheless, it's a move I survive, so I'll let it go. They do have flamethrower, and that's a brutal Symbol switch, as I end up sending in Feraligatr as they bring in Virizion. I wanted to bring in the Feraligatr there because Feraligatr up energy is just devastating into just about anything that could be brought in, but man, was really not hoping to see Virizion. Ice Beam lands, opponent gets farmed down, they try to go for good timing and it actually ends up costing them. In comes the Skuntank. Skuntank gonna be knocked out by a Hydro Cannon unless they surrender the final shield, which they do not. In the back, they have their own Feraligatr and this game should be over. Polteageist, of course, going to have a very negative matchup into Feraligatr, but I've already gotten the opponent low enough that I should just be able to Astonish down at this point. So I can let my Feraligatr go, and now with his shield to hide behind, let's just tap the fast move Astonish quite a few times. The Astonish goes through, so I can commit the shield. Thank you, Polteageist. Honestly, that's about the most value it's given me all day, is just farming things down in an endgame. Cobalion versus a non-Shadow Dragonite on the lead. Now this is a bit of a tricky matchup, as opponents will love to catch out of this. I'm going to call it a superpower does not KO. They full send the superpower. They're going to try for a catch out of the Poliwrath, and I get to hold on to my energy and respond with Polteageist. Now this is a counter user into a ghost type, so I should have a great advantage here, but look at the scald damage. Oh my goodness, no. Polteageist getting absolutely shredded. Oh, this is absolutely terrible scenes. Shadow Ball will pick up the KO. Opponent gets to bring back in the Dragonite for free and get a bunch of farm here. I do at least get 2 Astonishes. I have a ton of energy on the Cobalion. I'm expecting a shield, so I'm going for the bait here with the Sacred Sword. Opponent absolute stones there, calling the bait. Oh my goodness. Now I get to fire off another Stone Edge. They're going to let that through in the back. We have dueling Feraligatrs, but they are ahead by 1 turn, because they got to bring in their Pokemon after their second to last one fainted, whereas I switched out. And being behind by 1 turn can definitely make this quite a bit difficult. The good news for me, however, is this is a rare instance where my opponent having the non-Shadow Feraligatr is a lot better, because they just don't have the damage output here. I can actually live a Hydro Cannon, and being able to survive a Hydro Cannon in this mirror is just completely game winning for me. I have back-to-back Hydros. Opponent is going to be committing the final shield, but now I can fire off Hydro Cannon number 2. And while this will not be enough to KO, it's going to get them plenty low enough. I'm just going to look to farm up a ton of energy, switch into Cobalion, and I do get the double kick through. And that double kick landing means I can farm them down, or in this case, it looks like they do barely survive the Shadow Claw, so I can make it to the Hydro Cannon, and Hydro Cannon will deliver victory after, unfortunately, Polteageist was extremely disappointing versus Poliwrath. Hopping into the final match, Cobalion versus the Shadow Feraligatr, this time on high alert for any catches, but the catch does not happen. The Sacred Sword is going to land. I'm now going to switch into my own Feraligatr, and this is how I would play out Feraligatr leads with this team. You want to chip and then switch out, because if you switch instantly after Sacred Swording, the opponent can't really stay in, because after they throw, you're always going to be a Shadow Claw ahead. In comes Drifblim. Drifblim looking for the farm down, but they're not going to get it. Feraligatr makes the Ice Beam. This will command a shield from the opponent, and the Shadow Claws have added up quite a bit. And now it's time. Go, Polteageist. Look at the Astonishes go. I'm going to shield what's almost assuredly an icy win, but they actually full send the Shadow Ball. Astonish versus Astonish. Polteageist gets the farm down in the back, is Primeape, and this is just a 1 game. I'm assuming they have to shield here. They actually end up calling the bait, which is a nice read, but I have a guaranteed win condition by going Cobalion and clicking no shield on the first move, because if they close combat, I can just Astonish down. My only lose con is shielding the first move and having it be a Rage Fist, so as long as I always no shield the first move, then I'm just in a completely one position. Now I can afford to shield the Rage Fist because I no shielded the first, and I can just get to the Sacred Sword. And Primeape, it can do many things, but it's not the tankiest, so it will get KO'd by the Sacred Sword, and we're able to take the game. All in all, I do think that these two new Pokemon are some of the coolest Pokemon designs we've had in a very long time. However, unfortunately, the stats do not translate amazingly to Go. I could see it potentially having some limited meta play in the future if it gets a bait move, because currently we know Astonish is a great fast move, and we've seen some Pokemon on the Glacier side of things have success with Astonish or Mud Slap since they are clones of each other. They are the exact same damage and energy, but they have to have good pacing. Something like a Shadow Golurk, which is very frail, still has wild success in the Ultra League because it has a very consistent moveset. Shadow Punch being 35 energy, and then your choice of Earth Power or Dynamic Punch as the more expensive nukes. But for Polteageist, its cheapest move being Dark Pulse really does let it down because it just ends up being very expensive. 5 to the first, which is 15 turns when you're as glassy as Polteageist is, really is not a recipe for success. So overall, even though it does quite a lot of damage due to that massive attack stat, this is not a Pokemon I'd recommend investing in at the current moment. You can definitely do a Sinistea raid or two, evolve it for the decks, and hold on to it for the future because as we know, Niantic likes to make a lot of move updates in the future, but upon release, Polteageist not going to see a lot of meta play. Instead, I would look at investing in the other ghost type that was released not too long ago, the Galarian Corsola XL, because that thing at level 50 is unbelievably powerful. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I'm in HomeSliceHenry.